just like I said with the South Lake Tahoe PUD, they just, the ballast goes along the foot of each one of those ponds, and so you can still utilize the pond when the water comes in, and it makes itself available when there is no water available.
And the ballast is not going to reduce capacity by very much.
No.
Since you're overbuilt as it is right now, that's not going to be a factor.
By very little, yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Any more questions on staff report? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, is there any new correspondence?
No, sir.
Anybody wish to speak in opposition of this proposal? Seeing none, does anybody wish to speak in support of this proposal?
I would support it. Sounds like good use of money.
All right, seeing none, we will bring it back to the board for the board's consideration. Again, thank you very much for your very good staff report. Very knowledgeable, thank you. Okay, what's the board's pleasure? The chair will entertain a motion in favor. What do we need here?
I move we adopt resolution number
1 second. 065, 15-065.
15-065, approving the reprogramming of the unused funds from the 2011-2012 State Community Development Block Grant CDDB 12-8396.
I'll second the motion.
We got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any more questions or discussion at all before we take a roll call vote? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Supervisor Chapman?
Aye.
Supervisor Alba?
Aye.
Supervisor Hancock?
Aye.
Supervisor Hammond?
Aye.
Supervisor Pyle?
All right. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That was painful, Chris.
Sorry.
Say hi to everybody up there, Chris.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. All right, now we're going to go to our 10:30 planning and building services. I've tried here, Maury, about 4 times, they keep cutting me off.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Season's greetings to all. I'm Maury Anderson, Planning and Building Services. Today, what we're requesting is that you receive a report from staff, receive public comment, and consider adoption of updates to our Lassen County groundwater monitoring plan. We have today, for your benefit, a presentation by John Ayers, who is from GEI, our consultant, formerly of Brown and Caldwell. Also with him is David Freeman. Both have a long history with working with the county on the development of our groundwater management plan back in the day. And I thought it'd be good if John could just give a brief overview of how we got to where we are today and what it is we're trying to accomplish today versus all the other little bits and pieces of legislation that are sort of peripheral components of the legislation that's bringing us forward into the new day of CASGIM and GSAs and all that. But that's not what we're doing today. We're simply looking at our monitoring plan and updating it. And with that, I'll yield the floor to John and let him give his presentation.
John?
Hello, Supervisor Pyle, Board of Supervisors. Some faces I recognize, some I don't over the years I've presented.
It used to be a lot more new ones.
Another year.
It's just so. Where am I going? All right. So I'm going to give a presentation today. Dave Fairman's going to help me with some of the technical stuff because he was our boots on the ground person for that. And so I'll start with background, a lot of the history of groundwater planning in the county, why update CASGIM. We'll spend a moment talking about the differences between CASGIM stands for the California Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program, statewide elevate. I always screw that one up. And then SGMA stands for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which I'm sure you've heard of, and gets abbreviated SGMA, or as referred to in the industry now as SIGMA. So when I slip and call it SIGMA, please forgive me. I wanted to explain that ahead of time. And then we're going to get into the details of our work, updating the plan, the enhancement project, conclusions, next steps, because we still have some ongoing things going on. So, background. So, back in the 80s and 90s, there were rumors of Nevada wanting to put in wells in the Honey Lake Basin and pump water, and there was, long before my time, I was still in high school back then, there was a action in the California legislature to establish groundwater management districts, and most of them are currently sitting inactive, but they're part of the story. And then in 2005, a group called the Fish Springs Intermountain Water Supply got together and decided to actually build that export project. And so they wrote an environmental impact statement, and they actually installed 3 wells, and they had a plan to pump 8,000 acre-feet per year out of the Honey Lake Basin through a pipeline to North Reno. And that actually was built, but not without a lot of protests from the county. And so the county protested the Nevada state engineer, who looked at the county protests and said, well, you guys aren't managing groundwater. Why do I have to listen to you? It's a summary. And so as a response to that, the county adopted an exportation ordinance forbidding export of water outside of the county. And then also in response to that, the county developed the Lassen County Groundwater Management Plan. This is where my introduction to Lassen County groundwater began back in 2007. And so the groundwater plan describes the existing Lassen County basin. There's 24 groundwater basins in Lassen County. Very unique in terms of California. Most California counties have 3, 2, 5, not 24. 24 is a big number. And it made this task a little bit more complicated. We had to dot our I's and cross our T's for a lot of areas. Anyway, so the groundwater plan describes the basins, protects existing uses, identifies implementation items. We built it with a working group made out of irrigators, members of the CSD, up and down from Big Valley down to Long Valley. So we had input from people who were on the ground using the water. And then it was adopted in March 13th of 2007. One of the implementation items in the groundwater plan was a development of basin management objective, which is something I headed up here in 2010, 2011. And so BMOs are based on groundwater level monitoring. What we did is we looked through the existing groundwater level monitoring grid, picked certain wells because of their better location, well construction information, similarity to use in each basin, and then set thresholds on them that required communication with the board. Now I'm summarizing, there's a lot more details there. BMOs are a collaborative management approach, and so if things start to decline because of drought or so on, there's a lot of conversation. There's committees that are formed that would investigate and then report to the board, and it kind of creates a public record of the groundwater issues. And it's really guided by monitoring. We picked 12 management areas. You can see them on the map here: Big Valley, Madeline Plains, Eagle Lake, Willow Creek, Honey Lake, Long Valley. And this was adopted and codified as an ordinance under Chapter 17.02. While we were doing the BMO program, the state signed SBX 76, which created the CASDIM program. And we had a task in our BMO program for a data report or a data collection report. And we repurposed that to create a CASDIM monitoring plan. And what we did in that plan is we used the existing monitoring grid that has historically been monitored by DWR and still is to this day. And we use that as the wells for our CASDIM program. And so we wrapped that up and submitted it. And then in 2012, DWR came back to us and said, well, you're no longer completely approved, you're conditionally approved. And so they had another grant round coming, so we applied for a grant. Oops, too far. I'll go back. So we applied for a grant to do the CASDIM enhancement project, which we are doing now. This year, during the drought, Governor Executive Order B2915 enacted restrictions on private municipal use and so on. But they also required that CASDIM be completed by December 31st of this year for any county, or specifically any groundwater basin, that wanted to apply for state funds in the future. And this is also the same year that, well, the year after, that Proposition 1 was passed by the public, which made a giant pot of money available for funding projects. So we're updating CASGEM, and now I can go to that slide. Why update CASGEM? It's basically, our monitoring is pretty good. We have some gaps that we're working to fill right now. The main reason we're updating the plan is to be compliant with that executive order so that at some point in the future, if the county decides to, we can pursue grants to do other groundwater projects. And that might be, in support of Sigma down the road, or it might be for something else, or more monitoring wells, or other things. If we don't do CASGEM, we can't apply for money. We're categorically exempted at that point. So, let's see. So I have a couple slides about the differences between the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and CASGEM. CASGEM is a monitoring program only. It was enacted by SBX 76. It's focused on data collection. DWR requires that we talk about the monitoring countywide in all 24 basins, and I'll get into how we do that later. Whereas Sigma is a management program and covers only medium and high priority basins at this time, which in Lassen County is Big Valley. And it was created by 3 different bills in 2014. And as it gets implemented, it will require its own monitoring that is separate from CASGEM. Whoever does that, it doesn't have to be me, may choose to use the CASGEM wells in addition to the monitoring, or maybe that's adequate, we're not sure, but it's a separate program entirely. So what we are doing here is CASGEM, not Sigma, so there's no management component to what we're doing right now. So I'll spend some time talking about the actual project, what work we've done to update the plan to make it compliant with DWR requirements. So first thing we had to do was reapprove the existing monitoring grid. And we did a data gap analysis where we identified areas we'd like to get new wells. We went out and started doing some of that, added some wells, and David's going to talk about that. And then we've created an updated plan with a component called Alternative Monitoring Plan, which covers these basins that are throughout the county. There's 16, 17 of them that have 0 or 1 well in them. So there's no reason to monitor a well in a basin that's not being used. So the first thing we had to do was reapprove the existing monitoring grids. So these are the same wells in the same spots pretty much. And they're a little small, and I apologize for that. I should have done a better job making that bigger. But initially, DWR said we were okay, and then in 2012 they said, well, we need to know the well construction of these wells for this to be CASGEM compliant. And, well, we didn't do that. So we wrote a grant saying we're going to go ask people for permission to use their well construction information. And between the time we wrote the grant and when we started the detailed work on the project, Senate Bill 83 was passed, which made well logs public information, although when the department releases them, they redact the name and contact of the well owner. So because of that change in the regulatory climate, I'll say, we were able to convince DWR to just grandfather in the existing monitoring grid without having to spend a bunch of time contacting a lot of people. And so these wells are now in the CASGEM grid. And so, pardon me. So with those wells in mind, we moved on to a data gap analysis, and David's going to talk about that.
Morning. So I'm a geologist working with John on this project to kind of identify where in the county would be most beneficial to be monitoring groundwater levels. And of course, John talked about kind of the 16 basins that don't really have significant use. Well, that leaves 8 basins where there is significant use, and a lot of these monitoring wells have been around since the 1950s. Some have dropped off the monitoring grid, some have come on, and so we kind of did a reassessment of what's there and where the data gaps are that could need to be filled. Go back. And we identified those 4 basins in orange. In addition, the Secret Valley was also one we kind of took a look at, but we decided that the monitoring was appropriate in that one already. So what we did was to kind of zoom in on each of those basins, look at where the monitoring was currently, does it have monitoring wells, how are those monitoring wells distributed throughout the basins, are there enough of them to kind of cover the area. And we identified these kind of 5 basins as needing, as having data gaps. The 2 key ones that we focused in on were the Eagle Lake area because there are over 400 domestic wells in that basin, and so it's relied upon pretty heavily, but there is no monitoring in that basin. So that was kind of a key one to at least get something there to see what's going on over the long term. Madeline Plains is another example where it's a almost 250 square mile basin, and there's only one monitoring well in that basin. These others we identified, of course, Big Valley because of its medium priority status. I started contacting people to try to get permission and access to wells to see if they, first of all, were appropriate to use and whether they'd be willing to let the county use them in the monitoring grid. Started in Eagle Lake, talked to some residents, but also some public entities up there, like the Community Services District and the Forest Service, who have wells in the area. That picture on the bottom is a monitoring well around the evaporation ponds. They have 3 monitoring wells around there that they have given us permission to use. You notice the access is very easy to get the water level sounder in there because there's no pump or anything. In the Forest Service wells, they do have pumps in the wells. Pumps in the well isn't ideal for a monitoring network, but it can be done. And in this case, they have a good access port between the casing and the discharge pipe in order to be able to monitor at that Forest Service well, which, by the way, was used for this watering troughs for cow grazing and for wildlife up in just north of Spalding there. And finally, we went out into Madeline Plains and talked with Ed Kranz, who was part of the monitoring program out there, and was very receptive to wanting to have some additional monitoring in this area. He has given permission to use his well out east of Termo. He has it covered under a tire to keep it from freezing during cold temperatures, but. In all, we've added 6 wells. 6 wells in the Eagle Lake area and 1 here in the Madeline Plains area. So we're still continuing with trying to add more monitoring. Especially the Eagle Lake area, we're looking at that because Spalding is such a. We only have 1 monitoring well kind of near the lake in the town of Spalding, and that's kind of where the primary use goes on. But we're also need to kind of fill in some gaps in Madeline Plains, of course, Big Valley, and then Fall River Valley, which at this point is needs to have 1 more well in order to kind of meet the letter of the law. Although our CASDM funding is not at risk at this point. So
okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. So we're still looking for potential new people who wanted their wells monitored, ideally in Fall River Valley, Big Valley, Madeline Plains, or Eagle Lake. We have 3 more months. We're getting an extension on the grant funding so that we can do the project through the end of March to get these extra wells in. We wanted to initially get all the wells in before we submitted the monitoring program. But as time got short and getting out there was taking a lot longer than we had anticipated, we've brought the monitoring plan up for adoption with a term in there about updating the monitoring grid without having to bring it back in front of you each time. So we took David's work and updated the CASDM monitoring plan. So we've got our improved groundwater level monitoring from the site visits. And we covered all of the little itty-bitty basins, which what are known as alternative monitoring plans. So, like Dixie Valley, and Grays Valley, and Pine Creek Valley, and Harvey Valley, and Tuladad Canyon, and Painter's Flat, and so on. There's a whole bunch of those. And so what an alternative monitoring plan does is SBX 76 required monitoring of all basins throughout the state without exception. And then a trailer bill came through a few years later that allowed for monitoring without having monitoring wells for cases like this where there is not a significant amount of use. And so monitoring is done through reviewing satellite imagery, reviewing zoning changes, and by reviewing the permits issued for these basins. And then the county is required to update every 3 years for these basins. It should be mostly just procedural because a lot of these areas are natural preserves and not really about to change. And so these alternative monitoring plans cover the areas with minimal use. We meet the letter of the law, and we get to move on. So while doing the development of the alternative monitoring plans, this is actually something I did, we got zoning and a GIS coverage from the county. And then we interpreted the zoning and combined the zoning. So if it was agricultural, different flavors of agricultural zoning, we combine that just to be agriculture. And so there's different amounts of, say, I think that's what I have this page for. In your booklet on page 84, we've got a map for full flat groundwater basin that says county zoning on it. And what that should say is a zoning summary. Galen caught up with me and said, hey, we're really concerned. We don't want someone to grab this report and then go to the county and say, well, the zoning says it's this. What this is a summary, not inaccurate. So we're going to update the plan and correct the title and add a disclaimer that says that this map shows summarized zoning and is not appropriate for land use planning. A couple other minor fixes is that we have a section in the plan about collaboration with other entities, which is like Sierra County, the community, not the Honey Lake RCD, and Modoc County. But we don't talk about Shasta County, even though we share a basin with Shasta County. And that's because we don't have any forward plans with Shasta County right now. But it looks like an omission. I wanted to address that, and we're Galen and staff will stay in touch with the county and move that forward as needed. And then lastly, on some of our maps, we have a clearly labeled county boundary. It's Shasta County to the west, and in one of them, the Modoc County, the Big Valley one, we don't label Modoc County, so we're going to fix that also. So we've updated the CASGIM plan. It has been preliminarily approved by DWR staff all the way up to their senior reviewer, Brett Wyckoff. We have a proposed plan in the CASGIM system right now. And so what this does is approving the monitoring plan so that we stay eligible for state funding for future work. And so our next steps will be to finalize the plan if we are approved here, and then we'll add additional monitoring wells to the grid, same as before, Fall River Valley, Big Valley, Madeline Plains, Eagle Lake. And we're looking for anybody who has any leads for us.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Questions from the public?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Number one, I remember hearing about this at a meeting up in Beaver sometime back. And as I recall, a takeaway from that meeting, basically the water that flows to the west and up in the Beaver area, which may end up in the Sacramento River, those wells are being monitored at a higher priority than as the water that essentially flows east.
Right. I briefly touched on that, and I'll go back to the slide where I have a figure that's related. There we go. So Big Valley is on the Pitt River, and all of Big Valley, including the Modoc portion of it, drains to the Pitt River. And the Pitt River joins the Sacramento River and goes out to Delta. And not because it goes to Sacramento, it's been designated medium priority by the department. Again, this is not a CASGIM question. This is a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act thing. So separate from the project that I'm asking about today.
This is on the new legislation.
It's the new legislation. Big Valley has been designated medium priority by the department because of the amount of use and the population and the groundwater conditions.
Okay, so, and then with the wells, are you monitoring volume and quality?
No. So, all right, again, two different programs. The calcium program, we are only monitoring levels. So no quality, no production. Under Sigma, down the road, that may be something that gets decided to do there. There has to be reporting in aggregate under Sigma, but that is that's a separate program.
So you're just monitoring the underground water table?
Yeah, we're just monitoring the table here.
Any other questions, David?
John, the additional wells, is the approval of the CASGIM sort of pending those additional wells being identified, or
No.
is that, you're just, from your standpoint, your expertise, you're thinking we need those
Right.
to do a better
So
job?
the calcium threshold is actually fairly low. The criteria that the department will mention, but you can't cite, like it's the unofficial criteria, is for low priority basins, they want at least one well per 100 square miles. And for medium priority basins, they want one per 10. But that's, they won't let me write that down. We put it in our plan, they made us take it out. So for areas like Big Valley, we have 18 wells and it's 130 square miles in the California side. We meet that criteria. But we know Big Valley is going to be under a lot of scrutiny because of Sigma, so we think it'd be good to add more wells now while we're being paid by the state to do so and benefit that area. Also, Madeline Plains needs a few more wells. So we're approved right now, but we think it's important to add a few more wells and get a better understanding. Madeline Plains in particular, the wells are in the center, the use is on the edges. We would like to get a few more in there.
Any other questions from the public? Sorry for that.
Aaron Dixon.
What's your name, sir?
Aaron Dixon. I'm from the Susan in Rancheria. In your plan, do you have any other tribes in your water plan that you have written already?
Well, I don't know. I'm confused. What's the question?
The question is has any of the tribes in California gave their input in regards to the monitoring of the wells? And the next question is, when you put up the Fish Springs project, you indicated there's going to be 8,000 or 8,000 acre feet that was going to be removed from the groundwater. Well,
That was actually built. I didn't do it. I'm not responsible.
I'm well aware of
I
that,
started working.
but in response, but your figures, the figures that I have, it's more. It's 14,000.
It's 14,000 now?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, the number I have in there is from the CIR for back in 2005.
I think that was 2000.
And I know they pumped it for a while, and then they shut down when the economy crashed. And I don't know if they've started pumping again or not. I do know
It's going again.
that in the groundwater plan, we identified a straight line of wells along the state line in Honey Lake. And they have a history of being completely flat, tenths of a foot movement per year. So if those start to move down, and land use on the Lassen County side has not changed, then it's pretty easy to make a strong case that the pumping on the Nevada side is the case. So we keep an eye on the monitoring that's right there, and I can point at it. It's right there along the state line. Well, laser goes away. So but it's right here. So we have about 5-6 wells here. We keep an eye on those, and as long as they're not going down, the pumping in Nevada is not adversely affecting Lassen County. If your tribe has some wells you'd like to be monitored or considered added for our monitoring program, we'd love to talk to you.
Well, I don't think we have wells, but we have springs that we have at least 6 springs on our trust lands, and 4 of them already dried up.
Yeah, it's been a dry time.
And my next question is that going to be a public document that we can
Absolutely.
obtain a copy of from the county?
Yes, there is a public document already. The update will be, I guess it's the way right here is updated. Yes, you can get that.
It is public document.
Yeah.
Is that online, or is this just a physical?
Well, before we as a consultant are able to publish it, we need to make sure it's approved by the board. So right now it's been draft. But since it's a board package item, I believe that is
Yes,
publicly available.
Madam Clerk says that that was part of the agenda and that there was a hyperlink that you could click to access that document. It's big, but it's there.
It's watermarked proposed.
It is,
Correct.
yeah. It's not final. And it is complete, and it has all the reference information we used to develop.
And this is the same document that the DWR has tentatively indicated
Approved.
that meets their
Correct.
criteria.
It was already past the previous one.
Right.
And that's what we're using now.